The 15th chapter of Luke's Gospel is often called the lost chapter. That name isn't used because the text was ever lost, but because the chapter is made up of 3 of Jesus' parables about lost things being found. It begins with the parable that Bernadette just read, the lost sheep. Then it moves to a parable about a woman who lost a coin and had to sweep her entire house to find it. And the chapter closes with the parable about a lost son, most frequently called the prodigal son. Aside from all being about something that was lost being found, the emphasis in each of those parables is on the joy when the lost sheep, coin, and son are found. So as we make our way through Paul's fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5:22 and 23, I decided to explore the nature of joy by probing this chapter. And since St. Patrick was a shepherd in his youth, and I've been a literal shepherd and am now a metaphorical one, the lost sheep parable is what I picked to read. But they are all connected, and we're going to explore parts of all 3 of them. The 3 parables aren't only connected by being about finding something that was lost. They also kind of build on each other. One way they do that is by increasing the perceived value of the lost thing. First, it's 1 of 100 sheep that's lost. Next, it's 1 out of only 10 coins. And finally, it's 1 out of just 2 sons. But the first clue we get that these aren't presenting a simple economic message is that there is equal anguish at each loss and equal joy when the lost is found. Most people understand that response with the prodigal, even while we also understand the elder brother's resentment when the brother's bad choices seem to be rewarded when he returns home, while the elder son, who never offended his father or squandered his money, gets no extra benefits. The love of parents for their children, the worry if they're headed down a difficult path, and the joyous relief if they turn around is still common enough that we get it. A lot of people can also understand the woman turning everything in the house upside down to find the lost coin. Maybe fewer than those who relate to the prodigal story, but anyone who has known financial insecurity or has lost a diamond out of an engagement ring down the drain or something else precious to them, regardless of the monetary value, understands the desperation of searching for the precious thing. But I've met a lot of people who were a bit puzzled by the shepherd. He's got 100 sheep to care for. The shepherd is their protector. And trust me when I say that sheep need protecting. I met a veterinarian in Scotland who told me that in his experience, all sheep try to kill themselves and it's the shepherd's job to stop them. They're very creative in that way. And yet, in the parable, when 1 of that 100 goes missing, the shepherd leaves 99 unprotected to go find that 1. That seems like dereliction of duty. The shepherd could well have come back triumphant with the 1, only to find that the 99 had been stolen by thieves or ravaged by lions or wandered off to find their own ways to kill themselves. When confronted with the sheep parable, many hear an economic parable. And that's not really an uninformed place to start. After all, livestock were currency in Jesus' day, with wealth often measured and traded in flocks and herds. And you could keep going with those parables. The next parable is about a woman losing a coin, and the final one is about a son who squanders an inheritance before his father is even sick, let alone dead. But each of them is also about more than economics. And it's the sheep parable, I think, that gives that away at the get-go. Jesus has lots and lots of parables about money and possessions. Some of them praise the thrift of a person, some condemn the greed of a person, some even praise the shrewdness of using money. But none of Jesus' teachings or parables about the use of economic resources encourage putting 99% at risk for the sake of finding 1% that is lost. Wendell Berry, one of my favorite writers and poets, has a wonderful take on this parable in his 2002 essay called Two Minds. The parable is just one illustration in his much larger piece about the differences between what he calls the rational mind and the sympathetic mind. All kinds of ways you could define that, but he has his way. In describing the shepherd of the parable, Berry writes this: "Because he is a man of sympathy, a man devoted to the care of sheep, a man who knows the nature of sheep and of the world, the shepherd of the parable is not surprised or baffled by his problem. He does not hang back to argue over risks, trade-offs, actuarial data, or market values. He does not quibble over fractions. He goes without hesitation to hunt for the lost sheep because he has committed himself to the care of the whole hundred, because he understands his work as the fulfillment of his whole trust, because he loves the sheep, and because he knows or imagines what it is to be lost. He does what he does on behalf of the whole flock because he wants to preserve himself as a whole shepherd." He continues, "He also does what he does because he has a particular affection for that particular sheep. To the rational mind, all sheep are the same. Anyone is the same as any other. They are interchangeable, like coins or clones or machine parts or members of the workforce. To the sympathetic mind, each one is different from every other. Each one is an individual whose value is never entirely reducible to market value. The rational mind conceives of itself as eminently practical and is given to boasting about its competence in dealing with reality. But if you want to hire somebody to take care of your 100 sheep, I think you had better look past the animal scientist and hire the shepherd of the parable, if you can still find him anywhere. For it will continue to be more reasonable, from the point of view of the rational mind, to trade off the lost sheep for the sake of the sheep you have left, until only one is left." The sheep parable, as well as the other two, build to the same point, which is only comprehensible when reading with what Berry calls the sympathetic mind. Every one of the three ends with a party, with the person who has found what was lost filled with joy and wanting to share that joy with others. And there's one more thing that binds the three. The first two verses of the chapter set the context for all three of the parables. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him, the him being Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." The parables about the sheep and the coin end with Jesus tying them directly back to that initial complaint. After the party celebrating the found sheep, Jesus says, "Just so, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who need no repentance." After the found coin party, Jesus says, quote, "Just so, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." While Jesus doesn't have a direct sentence like that at the end of the prodigal son parable, that parable is both longer and more ingenious. It deftly casts the scribes and the Pharisees and their complaint as the elder brother, when the father in the parable says, quote, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found." One of the things looking at all that together taught me this past week is that we may have been missing an important point in all the passages where Jesus gets in trouble for hanging out with the riffraff, the wrong people. That happens to him a lot. While we're not wrong to note, as we usually do, that Jesus welcomes all, even tax collectors and sinners, maybe we're meant to look at Jesus celebrating with those folks as a celebration of their return from sin to faithfulness. Maybe Jesus is not actually eating with tax collectors and sinners to convert them. Maybe he is celebrating their newfound discipleship, rejoicing that these individuals around him were lost and are now found. That's what every parable in this chapter is about. The joy and celebration of the lost being found. And in the longest allegory about the lost son, he pretty obviously labels the scribes and Pharisees as the resentful older brother, the one who didn't need finding, the one who had never been lost, but who couldn't find it within himself to rejoice when someone he considered unworthy was welcomed back into the fold. The 99 who couldn't stand that the shepherd would leave them to search for the single sheep who couldn't manage to stay with the rest of the flock like they had. And all of that reminds me of the sermon I preached about joy back in Advent of 2023, when I discovered in that research that the Greek word for joy is a form of the word for grace. Specifically, it's the form of the word for received grace, when we recognize and acknowledge that we have received grace from God. Grace is infused throughout Methodist tradition, with every inch of John Wesley's theology of spiritual growth and birth related to it. When Methodists use the term grace, we mean acknowledging the gifts we receive from God that we have no business receiving. We have not earned them, we don't deserve them. And yet, here is God raining love and acceptance and banquet invitations down on us anyway. When we recognize that we have been given grace, that produces joy. The scribes and the Pharisees and the elder brother of the prodigal son parable, who are the bookends of the chapter, are not joyful. They're upset. They're resentful. Their joy is blocked, not because they have not received God's love and abundant gifts. They have. But they are unable to experience joy from that because they see those gifts as entitlements, not grace. They believe they deserve God's favor and attention because of their righteous living, while believing that God has no business giving such gifts to those who, for whatever reason, have lost their way and happen to need somebody to help them out. For them, God's love should be conditional and merit-based. For me, but not for thee. The three parables make it plain that that's not how it works. The one sheep, the one coin, the one son, all have stop the press's value in God's eyes. God is love, and as I said last week, love is the one thing that we are given to receive and to give without limits. We are commanded to spread it throughout the world. Joy is the fruit that springs up almost overnight when we recognize that the daily abundant gifts we receive, from our first breath to our last on this earth, are not something we've earned, that they are grace, God's love poured out on us without regard to our merit. There are no work requirements for grace. There is no repayment period. There is never, ever a cutting off of benefits. Joy is a fruit of the Spirit because it's only the Spirit of God within us that can keep our self-image in balance. If we think too much of ourselves, we're prone to be the scribes, the Pharisees, and the elder brother, who are unable to recognize that the love and invitation we have from God is not something we've earned. God does not owe us love. God doesn't operate on a quid pro quo basis. Conversely, if we think too little of ourselves, we won't recognize that the banquet invitation is really truly for us as well. We'll keep grinding on, trying to earn it, while the gift is right there on the kitchen counter just waiting to be opened. Some of us are so full of self-loathing that we'll go to destructive extremes, almost as if to prove that we are too hopeless, too lost for God to even bother to look for, let alone find us. And should we be found, we expect only punishment. But the parable says, nope, it's not punishment. God's going to throw a party. The spiritual birth that Jesus describes to the Pharisee Nicodemus in John's Gospel, 3rd chapter, the one Jesus calls being born again, is the awareness that unworthiness is simply the human condition, twinned with the good news, the gospel, that our worthiness has nothing whatsoever to do with God's love for us. When the knowledge of our unworthiness reaches for the extended hand of God's free and universal love, we receive grace and experience joy. I once was lost and now am found, as the hymn goes. And once we have experienced that for ourselves, when we see it happen in others, that same joy returns to us. All those at the parties in the 3 lost parables that the elder brother wouldn't go to, all of those who were at the parties are able to rejoice at what someone else has found because it refreshes the memory of their own joy in both finding and being found themselves. We would, however, be impoverished if we thought joy only came in the momentous occasions of our lives. Once we realize that God's love is an ever-flowing stream and not something that's doled out in specific moments or with any kind of divine restraint, the fruit of joy is manifest much more frequently until it becomes a constant state. Joy is not a seasonal fruit, but the manifestation of God's love is so constant and universal that it does require our mindful attention to recognize it. It's hard for a fish to realize it's swimming in water. Because I've been trained since childhood to recognize God's love at work in the natural world, that's where my moments of joy most frequently come. At my cottage, those moments come every day, constantly, throughout the day, as I cherish the gifts of the chickadees who flutter down almost close enough to touch my hair as I put seed out for them on the deck. As I hear the blue jays call to each other like Paul Revere through Boston, "The peanuts are coming, the peanuts are coming." It comes as I see the great blue heron standing on the log in the lake, drying and cleaning her wings for an hour, and me with the totally undeserved privilege of being just a small part of her grace-filled world. It has come when I've been on the back of a horse, realizing that the magnificent beast has no innate requirement to carry me, and yet works with me as if we are a single unit to wander, run, and enjoy the world. It came when my Florida neighbor would call me to tell me that there was a sheep turning over paint cans in his garage. And I went to retrieve Chester, my perpetually lost sheep, and bring him back to the safety of the sheep family and their protected fold. It has always come when interacting with the pets I've had for years, when I've felt washed in the realization that love between species is as much of a gift from God as any other love. But it has also come in discovery of new connections and new information that, wait a minute, joy is a form of grace. Things that unlock new understanding. And in watching children discover both the world and their own abilities for the very first time. It's come in harmony, the literal harmony of music, as many voices and instruments become one, but also the harmony of labor, when gifts of many individuals come together for a unique and singular success. All of that and more is gift. A reclamation of things that are frequently lost in our society and lost to our awareness. But the recognition of the gift, and therefore the receiving the joy from it, requires the awareness that I am neither more nor less valuable or necessary to the goodness of God's creation than anyone or anything else. I don't deserve the innocent trust of a chickadee or the faithful service of a horse. I don't deserve immersion in the sacred harmonies of music, the vision of sugar maples in the fall, or the successful blend of my labors with others. But still, God gives it. And still I reach out my whole self to receive it. And through such grace alone do I live. And so can you. The gift is on the counter. Open it, and it will be well with your soul. Amen.